So the main thing we're going to look at is what I kind of like to do when I'm designing something is creating components. That kind of speeds up the design process because instead of just like creating each mesh and each component of the scene one at a time, I can make components that I can reuse in multiple scenes and within the same scene. And to do this, it's helpful to do a little bit of sort of pre-planning. And, you know, that doesn't have to be super complex, but doing a little bit of like basic math setup can be really helpful for this. And so I'll just go through a really simple setup and kind of talk through what I'm doing. And again, you guys don't have to do it the exact same way, but I think there's different components of what I'm going to demonstrate that'll be helpful in terms of designing your own levels and maps. So the first thing I'm going to do, I have an empty scene here, and I'm just going to create a new scene, and I'm going to call this, I'll just call this a room. So I'm going to make a little room, and this is going to be a separate scene that I'm going to put into other scenes. We're going to design a component, but then we're going to make sort of copies of the component that have differences, and then we're going to build a separate level that uses instances of that component. Gyro, right? Is that how you pronounce it? It's close enough. Okay. Gyro. Okay. All right. So I've got my room. I'm going to start with a floor. So I'm going to add a mesh instance, and I'm going to rename this floor. And then I'm going to give this mesh a box shape. And then here is where a very small amount of planning can work well. Basically, what I want to do is build like a series of rooms that connect to each other, so that I can build a maze that my player will navigate through. And so to do that, the thing that will be really useful is to have rooms with different numbers of doors, and to have kind of a default room that I can make changes to and add and remove doors. I'm not going to put like a roof on the room because it's just going to make it a little bit easier, but you could, if you wanted like an interior setting, you could do that. We're also not really using lighting right now, so it'll be easier to skip through that. But anyway, I'm just going to create sort of a basic blueprint for a room, and then I'm going to make copies of that room. And so what I'm going to do is start with the size for the sort of default room. Obviously, I can change that in the future, but if I plan ahead and kind of like get good units, it'll prevent me from having to like redo a lot of stuff in the future. One thing that I like to start with is pretty basic, is just the number 12. 12 is a really useful number for designing stuff because it's divisible by 2, 3, and 4. So if I want to divide it in half or thirds or fourths, I can do those things very easily. And so you can have different sizes of, walls and doors and windows, and have a little bit of options in terms of the design of different rooms. There's other, you don't have to do it that way, but that's a way that I kind of like to do it. So I'm actually going to rename this to base room. This is just going to be sort of the most default room. And so for my base room, I'm going to set the X size for this block I want to make it a little bigger, so I could do 12, but what I'm going to do is just 12 times 2, so I'll do 24. And then for Y, instead of 1, I'm going to do 2 for Y, because it's going to make my snapping a little bit easier, since the mesh is drawing from the middle. If I have 1 up and 1 down, that'll make the snapping go better, because I'm going to snap to units of 1. And then I'm going to go on the Z and also do 24. So I have like a square floor to work with. I'm going to check my snap settings real quick and just make sure I have translate snap to 1. And so I've got my floor. And if I want to put a material on there, I'll just take one of my base materials. I'm going to use the gray check material. Okay, so I've got a little floor to start with a little checkerboard material on it. And I'm going to save this. So I'm going to save this scene as I'm working on it. I'm going to go into scenes and components, and I'm going to make a separate room here, or folder here called rooms, because I'm going to have a lot of rooms. So I'll save that. So I have my base room set up. And so I'm just going to add some walls. And so what I'll do is I'm going to make a copy of the floor. So I'm going to hit Command D to duplicate. And I'm going to drag this guy over here and line it up with the edge. And I'm going to call this wall 1. And then I'm going to change the dimension. So I could rotate this around like this, but I want to just change the dimension so that the Y is tall and the Z is less tall, or less wide. So I'm going to change the Y to 12. And notice that it changed both of my meshes. So I have to remember that when I duplicate a mesh, if I want to edit it, I have to go to make unique. So I'm going to make this unique and then make my Y 12 and my Z 2. Or actually, that's the wrong dimension. I'll make my X 2. Okay, so now I can drag this over, and I've got the snapping on, so it should snap right to the edge. So I really like using snapping. I have the snapping toggled on here. If you've got your scene set up in a good way, the snapping can be really helpful in terms of lining things up and making it easier to line things up and not kind of trying to guess if things are lined up. Okay, so I'm going to line up my wall with the edge of my floor. And that looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to duplicate this wall 2 and drag it over here. And again, notice how the snapping makes it really easy to line up those walls. And so now I've almost got a full room. I'm going to save this. And I'm going to duplicate the wall one more time. So I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on Windows. And I'm going to drag this into the middle and then use the Y rotate to rotate it around. And then I'll drag it out to the edge. Okay, so this is going to look fine, but notice that there's these kind of gaps right here. Depending on, you might not care about that. If you do care about that, I can just drag this over and then make this wall a little bigger. But to do that, remember, I'm going to have to make it unique, because if I try to change the size of this, so if I increase the Z to like 26 or maybe 28, it's increasing all the other walls. So remember, when I make changes to the mesh, I need to make it unique. When I make changes to the transform, it doesn't really matter. So I can make this unique, and then I'm going to take the Z and go to 28, and then move this over. And so that now lines up nice. And so I'll duplicate my wall again and move this guy over here. Okay, so this is my base room. I can use this as sort of my basis to create other rooms. This one doesn't have any doors, so it's not actually going to be useful for my scene, because you won't be able to get out of it, and that's not what I want for my scene. But it's a good sort of starting point to create other rooms. So again, this is just inside my scenes folder in components in rooms. That's how I kind of like to organize things. You might want to put it somewhere else. As long as you have it organized, it doesn't really matter where we put it. So there's my base room. So I'm going to make copies of this and create more rooms. You can do this with anything. It doesn't have to be a room. It could be like pathways. It could be platforms. It could be little, visual scenery. You can do this with anything. So I have my base room. Right now, it looks good, but it doesn't have any colliders. So remember that if I put a player in here, the player will just fall through the meshes. We need colliders to create the collisions between the player and the meshes in the room. So before I make copies of this, I'm going to set up my meshes. So I'm going to go to the floor, and I'm going to go to mesh and create collision shape. And I'll create a static body child with a tri-mesh and click create. And remember, once I do that, I want to set the collision layer. So once I create this static body, I want to go over to the inspector and go to the collision layer and set the layer to platforms. And I'll turn off the player layer. For the mask, I'm going to leave that as 1 because I do want to mask the player. That means it's going to try to interact with the player. Okay, so now I'm just going to repeat that process with each one of my objects. So I'm just creating the collision shape, static body. You're in MMP 271?
Yes.
What's your name?
Ryan. Ryan, yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. All right, where was I? Okay, so I'm going to take this static body, go to the collision, change this to 2, turn off 1, and then I've got 2 left. And so I just have to do these. And now I'm all good. When we make copies of components, it also kind of saves us a little time because every time I add a mesh that I want to have a collider, I have to go through that process. But if I make copies of this scene, I can do that without having to set up all the colliders again. So now I have a pretty nice basic little room scene with some walls, and now we're going to take this and make a few variations. So I'm just going to fold all these guys so it looks a little bit nicer, and then we'll make a copy of this in our file system. So I'm going to open up the file system, go to scenes, go into my components, go into rooms, and here's my base room. And I'm going to duplicate this. I can duplicate files just the way I would duplicate components in the scene itself. Any questions before I do that? Yeah. If you go to the transform menu and then go to configure snap, the translate snap is how much it moves, up, down, left, right, back and forth. And then you have to, if you want to use the snapping, you have to make sure that snap is toggled on, which is this button here, or the Y key. You can toggle it on and off. All right, so we've got our room. Let's make a copy. So I'm going to right click on the file and click duplicate. And for our room, we're going to have a room with 1 door. And I'll basically make a couple different types of rooms. A room with 1 door, a room with 2 doors, a room with 3 doors. We can obviously rotate the rooms, so we don't really need to, recreate more than, we don't need a left door and a right door, as you'll see once we start doing a little map building. So I'm going to call this room, or I'm going to call this 1 door room. That'll be a good way to line it up over here. So I'll click duplicate. So let's open our 1 door room. So I still have the base room open. Make sure that you open the correct room when you're editing. I'm going to open up the 1 door room. And so we see we have the same room here. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I change the name of the main node here to match the file. Because right now it's just going to be whatever I had in the original file that I duplicated. But when I put these into another scene and start building a level, what they're going to show in the scene is whatever is right here. So I want to make sure that this says 1 door room. And now I'm just going to make a door in one of the walls. So I'm going to move this down a little bit. And let's just choose a wall. Go to wall 1. And we're just going to make a couple edits here to make a door. So the wall is 24 units wide. So we could make a door at a bunch of different settings. We could make it be, 4 or 6 or 12. Well, probably not 12, but so I'm just going to divide by 3. And so what I'll do is I'll take this wall and I'll change the Z dimension. So instead of 24, I'll do 24 divided by 3. So I can just type that into the box and it'll do that math for me. And so now I have 1/3 of the size. Notice that it changed the other wall. So remember, we always have to make things unique when we want to change something that we're not going to change on the other side. So I'm gonna Command Z and undo that. Actually, I want to check one thing and see if it doesn't edit the original file, so we don't have to go back there. Okay, so let's make this wall unique. And now we can do 24 divided by 3. Oh, whoops. I just wrote 3 at the end. Okay. So once I change the size of the mesh, you can see the blue lines indicate that my collider doesn't match the mesh anymore. So what I'm going to do is just delete that collider. I could change the size of the collider, but it's just as fast to delete it. And then I'm going to recreate it. So I'm going to go to Mesh and create collision shape. And now I have a collision shape that matches the wall. Okay, so now I'm going to move the wall over here like this. And then I'm just going to make 3 copies of it. So I'll duplicate and move this guy here. And hit Command D again. Or sorry, I'm just going to make 2 copies, so there's 3 total. So now I have the same thing, but we have these 3 panels of our room. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So now I'll take this middle panel, and I'm just going to make it smaller. So I'll delete the static body. And I'll take this mesh, and I'll set the Y size to 2 to match the floor. And I have to keep remembering to make it unique each time. So let's set the Y size to 2. And then I'm just going to drag this down. Okay, so now we have a nice little door that we can walk out of the room through. So I'm going to save that. And there's our next room. I do have to add a collider here, so I'm going to go to create a collision shape and create. And before I forget, I need to make sure this has the right layer. And I probably maybe forgot to do that with my other new static bodies as well. Okay. So now we have a 1 door room. And from here, we can make more rooms. And I'll start with the 1 door room because it already has a door. If I want to make a room with 2 doors, I can just add another door in there. All right, so let's make a couple more rooms. Any questions before we continue with the next room? All right, and keep in mind you don't have to do it exactly the way I'm doing it, but hopefully, you know, this will give you some ideas for how to make your own components. Okay, so let's duplicate 1 door room, and we'll call this 2 door room. And I could actually have 2 different types of 2 door rooms, right? I could have one where the doors are across from each other, and I could have one where they're a 90-degree angle. So maybe I'll rename this 2A. And I'll open up 2A. And so for 2A, I'm just going to copy this section and replace this other section. So let's go in here. So I need to find, so I don't need wall 2 anymore. I'll just delete this. And so now I have wall 1, 5, 6. I should really put these together into like a door node. So maybe I'll select these and right click and go to reparent to new node and just use a regular node 3D. And I'll call this door 1. Okay, so then I can just duplicate door 1 and that'll duplicate everything in there, including all the colliders with all the layers, so I don't have to repeat that whole process. So you can see I saved myself a lot of time by creating components and then duplicating components. So I'll take door 1 and duplicate it. Now I've got door 2, and I just move it over here, snap it into place, and I'm all good. I don't know why this orange box is so big. Let me click on these things and make sure there's nothing weird going on. Okay, it looks fine. I'm not sure why this orange box sticks all the way out to here, but I don't think it matters. Okay, yeah, let me review that. So actually, I didn't do that in my one door room scene, so I'll go back there. So yeah, when I have like 3 components, 1, 2, 3, that I want to put together as one component, I can just select them all. So I can hold Shift and select them like that, or I can click on one and then hold Command or Control and select the other 2. And then if you right-click with these selected and click Reparent to New Node, that will ask you what type of node you want to reparent. So I can click on that. And for this one, I don't want like a mesh or something. I just want a generic node, just like a position. So I just choose Node 3D and click Create. And now I have this Node 3D that contains all of these guys, so I can move them around together. And then I would want to rename this something like Door 1. Although this is only a 1-door room, so this is just Door. So yeah. That's good. Okay. All right, let's make a couple more door rooms, and then I'm gonna start doing a little bit of prototyping. So I'm not gonna make every variation of a room, but it'll be good to just review this. So I've got this room that is like a hallway, basically, that you walk through. That's not the most exciting from a game design perspective, because we can enter the room and we can exceed the one way to go. So if there's nothing else interesting in the room, it's not really doing very much. So let's take this room and make it more interesting. So I'll make 2B. So I'll open up my file system again, go to 2A, right click and duplicate. And we'll call this 2B. This will be a right angle 2-door room. And so this one actually will be pretty easy. I basically will just take the existing walls and just rearrange them. So I've got my 2 doors. So I'll take wall number 4 and move it over here, and then rotate it around, and then move it over here. Okay, and then I'll take door 2. So another good reason for parenting stuff is I can move all this stuff together. I'm gonna move it into the center of the scene. I don't know why the pivot point for this node is all the way over there. Oh, actually I think I know why, actually, because I moved it. So let's actually just reset this transform. Okay. Oh yeah, okay. So this is actually a good thing to talk about. It might be kind of confusing. I'll just go over it real quick. So when I created, I'm gonna hide door 2 for a second. So notice when I created door 1, the reason that orange box looks like that is because when I made that new node, the default position of the new node is set to 0, 0, 0. So even though most of the stuff is over here, the position of the node is 0, 0, 0. So there's this visual kind of offset here. That's not the end of the world if it's just staying right there, but since I'm gonna move these other components around, it makes it hard to rotate. See how it rotates around? Well, actually, it's kind of useful because it matches up with the room. So actually, maybe I'll leave it the way it is, but generally what you might want to do is reset the position of the components and then move it around. So that would be a little bit tricky. Like I would want to move this guy back here, but it may be more confusing than leaving it as is. But yeah, so the parent node, the default position is going to be 0, 0, 0, which is why it kind of is offset and it rotates around that center position. Anyway, let's work with what we've got. So I'm going to turn door 2 back on and swing it around here. And that looks pretty good. There is this like little gap here. So if that bothers you, you can get rid of it. But we're going to have to edit this mesh to do so. And then this guy is probably overlapping a little bit. Yeah, it's overlapping right here. So you don't really need to change those things because you're not going to notice it when you're inside the room. But if you're slightly obsessive like I tend to be, you might want to, match these guys up. So let's grab this one and we're just going to delete the collision shape. We're going to take this mesh and just make it slightly smaller. So we're just going to take 2 units off. So I'll say -2. Or no, maybe it's 4 units. So let's do -2 again. Uh-oh. Oh, no, I guess. Oh, I forgot to make it unique. Whoops. Okay. Let's make this unique because it's going to be a different size. And then let's take off 2 units and move it over here. Okay, so if you care about that level of sort of like lining everything up and being precise, you can do that. If you don't worry about it. Okay, so I've got that in place, and now I need to remesh it. So I'm gonna add the collision shape, and I have to remember to change the collision shape layer to 2 for platforms, and there we go. And I'll do that over here as well. So I'm just gonna delete the static body. I'm gonna slightly change the size of the mesh to fill that gap. So I'll add 2 units. So I'll just say +2. And then it made everything move, so that tells me I have to make it unique. So I'll try that again. And go like that. And add my collision shape again. And create. Okay, so I've got my collision shape. All right. So now I've got my 2-door room. And I can basically keep going. You know, I can make all sorts of different variations of this 2-door room. But when I start to actually build out my level, I'll be able to rotate around. So if I go up here to this main node, everything is still relative to this main node up here. So when I actually put this in a level, I'll be able to rotate it around to make any, you know, angle of the 2 doors that I want. And so I'll be able to connect that to other levels by lining those up. All right. So I'm going to make some more components on my own just for fun, but I think the basic idea should be covered here. And I want to get into some actual level building and talk about a couple of level building techniques. And yeah, so I'll get started with that now. Trying to think if I need anything. I think actually I need one more. I think I need one 3-door room to do what I want to do next. So let's do that real quick. So I'm just going to save this. I'm going to duplicate and make one 3-door room. So I'll open up my 3-door room, and I'll just get rid of the wall that's already been resized here. So I'll just delete that. And then I'll make a copy of my 2nd door. So I'll just hit Command D to duplicate that and rotate it around here. And I'll fix the little gap later. I've already talked about how to do that, but that looks fine. Okay, so now I've got a 3-door room as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop this recording and pause for a second, and then I'll do another quick example of actually building out the level.